So got my spot. It's that tree back there, got some of the water. It's a great day. It's windy, so no umbrella, but should be a good one. Painting outside is the hardest type of painting there is. So my first tip is be patient. When I first started painting outside, I struggled so much. I felt really confident with my studio work, and if I tried to paint landscapes from photos in my studio, it would go fine. But then I would get outside and it was like I never picked up a paintbrush before. Sometimes I would drive 45 minutes to a park or something and walk around for an hour and just not find anything to paint and go home without even having done a painting. But I can say for sure that my pursuit of getting better at plein air painting has helped me more than anything else that I've done. Because if you can get pretty good at plein air painting, then you can pretty much paint anything, in my opinion. And it was interesting because the fact that I was so bad at it when I first started made me want to do it more. I didn't like that I couldn't do this aspect of painting, and I saw all my favorite painters were doing it, so I was like, I have to learn how to do this. So whatever it is that you struggle with painting, if it's an aspect of painting, if it's plein air painting, if it's portraits, or whatever it is that you struggle with, just keep at it. Keep plugging away at it. Eventually, you're going to make that weakness a strength, and it's going to elevate everything that you do. But it takes time, so be patient and trust the process. All right, tip number 2 is stay consistent with the materials you use to go out and paint. One of the things that makes painting outside so difficult is that there's a lot of changing variables. Your location changes, the weather changes, things are actually changing while you're there. Clouds are moving, lights changing, things are in light, then they're in shadow. A car comes and parks right in front of your scene. So with all these things changing, you want to have some things that are consistent. And having materials that are consistent is going to help you take steps forward. Whenever I go out, I have the same colors on my palette. I only take out 2 different size panels. I have a 9 by 12 inch size or a 11 by 14 inch size. Why do I have those sizes and why do I choose those sizes? Because those are the ones that I have wet panel carriers for. Now you might think, oh, that sounds limiting. Yeah, it is, but that limitation is going to help you. It's going to simplify things for you. I get a lot of people asking me, what do I use for an easel out there? I use the Strata Mini. I've been using it for about a year now, and I like it a lot. I've used a bunch of different plein air easels in the past. I've used Strata's Mark II, which I like a lot. But that's actually become my studio easel. I use that easel for every tutorial that's on my Patreon page. But I've also used just like a typical wooden pochade box, and that was good, but I didn't like the palette that was in it. There really wasn't one. I had to kind of just put like a piece of tempered glass in it. And that box was really heavy. It was nice because it did have a spot on the back of it to carry wet panels, but it was just really heavy and cumbersome. You can also use a French easel. I've used that quite a bit. It's a little bulkier, but it still works great. And if you're on a budget, it's great because you can also double that as an easel in your studio. It can hold a very wide range size of canvases. And French easels are pretty reasonably priced. I'm not gonna lie, when you start looking at like a lot of these plein air pochade boxes and stuff, they can get pretty pricey, and it's definitely an investment, but I found it's an investment totally worth it. I love my Strata Mini. It is strong, it is sturdy. I've thrown it in a backpack and gone hiking with it, and it gets banged around and it works great. It's lightweight, it has a built-in palette. And on their site, they have a bunch of accessories that you can put on it. Like I got a little thing that holds my brushes. There's like a little hook thing where you can hang your can of paint thinner. And I found Strata through following Brian Mark Taylor, who's an amazing plein air painter, and I've been watching his tutorials and videos for quite a long time. All right, tip number 3 is when you're out there, do a sketch first. You know what? Do a few sketches first. Force yourself to do at least 3 small, quick little thumbnail sketches. I used to not do this, and looking back, it was a huge mistake not to do this. It's the first thing I do now. Like, I don't even take out my gear yet. I just walk around where I think I can find a scene to paint with my sketchbook and a pencil, and I start trying to figure out compositions. Now, there's a ton to get into with composition, but one of the main questions you should ask yourself about your composition is, what is this scene about? For instance, this scene, it could have been about a lot of things. I could have said, hey, this is about this field of grass, and I could have framed it so that was the majority of the painting. Say, oh, it's about these big, tall trees, and I crop it that way, which is what I ended up doing. If I cropped it so each one kind of had the same amount of space, then the painting's not really about anything. It's always good to select one aspect of the scene and emphasize it as much as you can. I'm also thinking about values and value masses. I'm trying to imagine the scene in just 3 values: a dark, a midtone, and a light. It's amazing how important this is. If you ever walk into an art gallery and you see a painting across the room and it draws your attention to it, it's because of this value composition. Because when you see a painting across the room, you can't make out details. You can only kind of make out 3 values. And if those value shapes are dynamic and interesting, it's going to draw you in. I have firsthand experience of how true this is, because when I'm out there painting, if I know I have a good composition, more people will stop by and be like, oh, I like that. Even if it's not painted that well, or even if I haven't even worked on it that long, because that initial core composition of value shapes is interesting to people. Also, you need to not be afraid to move things. This took me so long to understand, and I would always see other great landscape painters' paintings, and I thought just, oh, they just found great compositions out there. They knew exactly where to stand. And that's not the case. You have to look at all the shapes or the subjects as characters to tell a story. For instance, I was looking here and I saw the shadows in these trees. I was like, oh, I like how these shadows trickle down from the top right down to the bottom left towards the beach, which is my focal point. It's like, I like that. I want to emphasize that. I want to make sure that my shadows are dark enough that they stand out and move the eye across the canvas that way. Now, if I zoom out, there was this plant over to the left, and I was like, I really like this, and this could be a good lead in, and also a good way to cut off the left corner of my canvas so the viewer's eye doesn't just fall off the edge there. You kind of bounce off this dark plant and moves you more towards the beach. There was also some shadows being cast on the grass from trees behind me. I was like, oh, like, what if I kind of orchestrated those shadows a little bit to lead us into the painting and also point towards my focal point of the beach? The more that you can utilize the characters that are in front of you, the more options you're gonna have as a painter, because you're not going to be relying on a scene to be set up perfect for you. There's a lot of painters out there that paint from photos, and they'll take hundreds of photos looking for that one photo where everything is set up great. That's fine, it just can be very limiting. Now, speaking of photos, tip number 4 is always take a photo first. There's been a lot of times where I'm like, oh, I like this scene, I'll just, jump into it, I'll do my sketch and I'll set up and start painting. I'll realize like, oh, I didn't take a photo before. And a lot of times having that photo can help you when you take your painting back into the studio. I'll talk about that later in the video here, but don't forget to take a photo. And also, like, while you're painting, like while the light's changing, take a couple photos here and there. Not because you're going to copy it exactly, it's just good to have as a reference. Also, if something happens, like there's been times I've been painting and a person walked by, I'm like, ooh, it'd be good to have that person in there, and I'll snap a photo of them as they're walking by. So I have like a reference for the drawing. Later on in the painting, I'll just pull out my phone and kind of draw from the phone, having that reference. Or, I paint a lot near water, and whenever like kayaks come up and beach, I'm like, ooh, it'd be cool if the kayak was there. And so I'll just take a photo real quick, because I don't know how long that kayak's gonna be there. Also, when taking photos, it can help you find a composition. Just seeing this big scene actually composed in your phone screen can be really helpful. Now, if you're thinking to yourself like, Chris, like, how do you move things? Like, it's so complex and detailed. It's like a whole tree or a whole bush. And like, how do you feel so comfortable like moving something that complicated? The key is to uncomplicate it. And that's why it's very helpful to think of these things as just big, flat shapes at first. I made a ton of videos talking about, whatever it is that you paint, first thinking about it of just big shapes of flat color. And that's what I'm thinking about at this stage. Because it's a lot easier to just move a big shape of flat color than some very complicated bush plant thing. All right, moving on to tip number 5. This tip might blow your mind, but plein air painting is not about painting very fast. I used to think it was. I always thought like, oh, the light's constantly changing and things are moving. You gotta be able to, really quickly, paint the scene how it is before things move too much. Now, yes, it does help to be able to paint fast, but that's really not what it's about. See, since I've figured out my composition in my sketch and I've locked in where I want my light and shadow to be, it doesn't really matter if things move, because I know that all I need to do is get a flat color in for the light and shadow side of all my major objects in the scene. So that's what I do. I try and get the canvas covered with paint as soon as possible, and this doesn't take long. And again, it's the same thing that I talk about in a lot of my videos, thinking in terms of big shapes of flat color. Doesn't matter if you're talking about a still life, a portrait, or landscape. Thinking about it simply is gonna make it simple to do. If I can get the light shapes and the shadow shapes of every subject in the scene, which isn't that many different colors and values, if I can get that and I like it, to me, I've already won the painting. And now it's just a matter of having fun with it and kind of seeing what I can do and what I can push and pull and where I want to put detail. You do not want to get caught chasing the light or chasing shadows. All right, quick side note here. I get a lot of people asking me about color mixing. That's why I'm offering the color mixing video from my Foundations of Oil Painting course for free. If you want to check that out, the link to it is in the description of this video. All right, tip number 6. Plein air painting is about translating, not documenting. You will drive yourself crazy if you go in there and try and paint every single thing that you see. It took me a long time to kind of get rid of that compulsion to want to paint everything, because it's like, oh, like I'm here, I'm seeing, you know, everything from life, and I need to document exactly what I'm seeing with my own eyes and not have to rely on a photo later on. You don't need to worry about that. And this is hard to kind of wrap your mind around, because one of the first things you're taught with drawing or painting is, you know, draw what you see, paint what you see. And that's true. But I guess you just only want to see and paint and translate what's important and leave out everything else. For example, with this tree, I don't need to go in and paint and capture every single value change in every single little shape, every single twig and branch. You know, it's like, oh, this is one tree and this is a different tree. All I need to do is communicate the overall form of the entire tree simply with a light side and a shadow side. That's all I'm worried about right now. Now, yes, you can do that and still add in detail and have like a lot more shapes. But for me personally, I find it more difficult and more interesting to be able to do that as simply as possible. You know, can I communicate this tree with just 2 values or 3 values? All right, tip number 7 is look for verticals in your composition. With landscapes, there's naturally gonna be a lot of horizontals. Those are gonna be easy to find. Verticals can be a little tougher. So when you find them, make sure to emphasize them and place them in the proper place. You know, if you're doing a city scene, it might be, you know, telephone poles. It could be a shadow on the ground or like a sidewalk. Since there's naturally gonna be a lot of horizontals in a landscape, these verticals will help counter those and balance the composition. Really wish somebody would have told me that a long time ago. All right, tip number 8 is if you go out and paint, bring a second canvas and bring enough materials to do a second painting. One, you never know how that first painting is gonna go. And yeah, you can always like wipe it off, but if you just don't wanna wipe it, you can just grab a fresh new panel and start again if you want to. I've done that a lot. But this time I finished my painting and I felt like that painting just kind of got me warm and loosened up to do another painting. And where I was standing, if I looked to my left, there was this great scene. I was like, oh, I want to try another one. Another panel, and so I did another painting. You know, you're going through the trouble of getting all your gear out there, might as well come back with as many paintings as you can. For this one, I decided to do a cloud painting, and cloud paintings are a great example of what I've been talking about throughout this whole video in terms of not worrying about painting fast and trying to document exactly what you see. You know, clouds are moving so fast, you're rarely gonna be able to draw and capture them exactly how they are. When I first started painting, like I thought that's what I had to do. I was like, oh, they're moving so fast. I'm like, oh, quick, paint, trying to capture it exactly how it is. But you're much better off just understanding the form of clouds, just thinking about it like anything else, which way is the light coming from, you know, which side's gonna have light, which side's gonna have shadow, and orchestrate those clouds to better suit your composition. You know, I had these clouds, you know, coming in from the right and kind of arching down the painting, like bringing the viewer's eye down to my focal point, which ended up being in the, you know, bottom right. And since I knew the structure of the clouds and where the light was coming from, I felt pretty comfortable making them up. All right, tip number 9 is don't worry about people watching you paint. I know it can be nerve-wracking, and you know, especially if your painting's not going well. I've been there tons of times where it's just horrible and people walk by and they stop and they look, and from their comments you can tell they're not too impressed, and that's not great for your confidence. No matter how good you get, there's always going to be times where your painting doesn't go well, or I wish I had some of the comments people have said to me on video as they walk by. Without knowing, they can be pretty condescending. You know, they never assume that I'm a professional or that I do this for a living. They always walk by and go, oh, is this just a hobby? Oh, is this for school or a hobby? You just gotta ignore it. If you have to, I've done this before, like just put in headphones, even if you're not listening to anything. And people just kind of like walk by and you know, take a look and not really say anything if you want to concentrate. But sometimes it's good to talk to the people. I've had times where people bought the painting right then and there because they like it so much. So if you don't mind talking while you paint, don't be afraid to strike up conversation with people. Just might lead to a sale. All right, tip number 10 is Your plein air painting doesn't need to be perfect. You can take it back to the studio and make changes. This is what I did with both my paintings. I didn't want to get caught into the trap of like just changing my painting to look exactly like the photo. I've made that mistake a lot in the past. And when you do that, you kind of ruin the point of going out and plein air painting in the first place, which is getting a painting that's capturing what you were seeing and feeling in that real place, and not just documenting a photo. You can use the photo to kind of remember and see what the structure of things were, or like, oh, like maybe I can pull that tree or whatever and bring it over here or something like that as a reference. But don't get caught into copying and just transforming your plein air painting into something that better represents a photo. And while I was making changes to my paintings, they were pretty small changes, just tweaks here and there, you know, changing values, changing this. And I'm making decisions on what to change from the checklist that I go over in my head of the fundamentals. You know, the fundamentals are drawing, color, value, composition, and edges. If you want to know more about this checklist, I've actually made a whole video on this checklist that you can use for your own paintings. If you want to check out that video, I'll put a link to it above right now. And I really liked this painting, and I thought, oh, this would be good to blow up big to like an 18 by 22. But before I did that, I wanted to test a couple things out. So I did a small test painting in my sketchbook of craft paper. I do a lot of oil paintings in there, you know, small little studies. You know, this was just like a little 3 by 4 inch study. And the main thing I kind of wanted to do was test out putting in a palm tree here. I just felt like the 2 lines created by the grass and the bushes running off the page was distracting. And if I could put a palm tree there, it would cut it off and keep your eye inside the composition. And once I started, the large painting went pretty smoothly, because I had solved all the problems ahead of time. And the process was the exact same. I blocked out everything with just big shapes of flat color and developed it from there. Now, even with all this planning, there were some things that I had to adjust here or there, but having gone through this process of sketches, plein air painting, you know, fixing it and other sketches and all that, I didn't waste any time on the big painting, because it's a lot harder and takes a lot more time to fix things on a big painting. You know, this big painting probably took me 3 or 4 hours of actual painting, but I couldn't have got there if I didn't do the plein air painting first. All right, hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this makes more people actually go out and plein air paint. I know it's scary, I know it's hard, but I promise you, you will be glad you did in the long run. Now, if you want to see what I'm painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero, here telling you to go get painting.